want to finish those last few ones from last week. We didn't get quite finished with that last little bit. Anybody else need a handout? Thank you. And these last ones about what works and doesn't work from this little booklet I downloaded from the internet of the magic of communication and marriage. It's really a nice little, neat little booklet. It lists 4 things that don't work. And the first one is criticism. It's defined as blaming or finding fault. How do you know? You're never home. My problem with you is... Whenever we attack someone, especially when we're upset, it often comes across as criticism. The second one is contempt. It's a lack of respect for the other person's dignity or attitude, having an attitude of superiority. It might involve name-calling or put-downs, sarcasm, rolling your eyes, hostile humor, belligerence. It's demeaning and it's condescending. Hostile. Hostile humor. Humor is just not funny.
The only thing I don't like about humor is dirty jokes, and I don't like dirty jokes.
No, we don't like those either, for you're absolutely right. Just, by the way, contempt is one of the major, maybe the major red flag of potential divorce. It's extremely dangerous when the spouses start showing contempt for each other. It is very, very dangerous. The third one is defensiveness. They may deny what the spouse is saying, refuse to admit their role in a problem, avoiding responsibility, turn the complaint back on the spouse, instead of receiving it, just turn it back on the other. And it's destructive because it escalates tension. It just, no, it's not my fault, it's your fault. No, it's not, it's your fault. No, it's not your fault. And it just gets worse and worse. And then the other one is stonewalling. And that's when one of the spouses may just get up and leave the room, walk out of the room. It's just like hitting a stone wall. And it's maybe perceived as avoiding the argument or the conflict, but actually it's avoiding the spouse and the relationship. And so, although it may be thought of as being a positive thing, it's not. There are ways to use a timeout, but stonewalling is not, just getting up and walking out of the room is not one of those. One research indicated that 85% of stonewallers are men. I'm just reporting. Just the facts, ma'am. So those are 4 things that don't work. They just don't work. But these do work. A gentle startup. Complaints are okay because they focus on a specific behavior. It's criticisms that focus on the person. And so avoid saying you, and think about what do I feel, what do I need, and so start it up gently instead of jumping right in. Build a culture of appreciation. Build a culture of respect in your relationship. One of the things they suggest is small things often. If you regularly express appreciation, gratitude, affection, and respect for your partner, you create a positive perspective, and that's a buffer against negative feelings. The more positive you feel, the less likely you will feel contempt. Take responsibility. Defensiveness is a way to blame your partner, and what you're saying in defensiveness is, it's not me, it's you, and so you don't resolve the problem. What you need to do is accept responsibility, at least for whatever part of it's yours, whatever part of the conflict is yours. Accept responsibility for it. But when you do that, you prevent escalating the conflict. And then physiological self-soothing. And this is a time when a timeout may be beneficial, but not in the sense of just avoiding the situation. When things are escalating, you may just have to say it's time to just stop the conflict, call a timeout, let things cool off, but come back to it. Stonewalling is a total avoidance where you just don't want to deal with it. And ta-da. And so those are some suggestions on what to do and what not to do. Continuing that same discussion and looking maybe a little bit more in depth at it, these are some symptoms of a breakdown in communication. And the first one is that stonewalling. He won't talk to me or she won't talk to me. When that situation arises, it indicates that the communication's broken down. So when you hear that, there's little or no communication going on between the two people. Along with that, long periods of silence. Obviously, that's a sign that the communication is broken down. If nobody's saying anything, there's a breakdown in communication. But it also shows up in loss of interest in the spouse or in the children. And I think you already realize that communication goes far beyond words, and the impact that communication has on a marriage and on a family, children and parental relationships and so forth. Loss of interest in carrying around the house, and just don't care. It sometimes manifests itself in cruelty. It might be physical cruelty, it might be mental cruelty, but that's a symptom that communication has stopped. Usually if you can work things out, then it doesn't escalate to that point. Quarreling, especially in public, or quarrels that are not resolved. You've probably all found yourselves in uncomfortable situations where you're in a public place and somebody else is just really arguing. Marked changes in behavior. Remember, we said before that communication is the lifeblood of marriage. It's the lifeblood of a relationship. And when communication dies, then the relationship dies. Self-pity or low self-esteem. Neglect and laxity in the home, beyond just not caring, going to the point of just neglecting. Not just things around the house, but neglecting the people in the house, the relationships in the house. Revenge taking or manipulation. Being overscheduled, always too busy. I can't do that right now. I can't talk about that now. I'm busy. Defensiveness, scapegoating. These are some of those four, but just kind of a little bit more in depth, I think. Well, and you can just see that there are lots of things that be signs of a breakdown of communication. A low threshold of emotional control.
You changed it for
What's that?
you gotta take it back. You went too fast. Okay,
No.
that's
A low threshold of emotional control. Loses control, breaks down, or gets upset.
I had something similar like this happen to me this morning, right as I got up, and it was about my disability, and it seemed we were on the right page. My mom was more emotional than me, and I ended up going to my room multiple times. I ended up slamming the door because I felt like I was insulted, but I just kept quiet, and then I returned, and
Yeah,
it
you're
somehow settled.
you're right. That's often the response when there's communication breakdown. We often respond that way. So you're right. Chronic depression. Resentments or bitterness or hostility. And dishonesty. Now for my favorite part, some of the biblical principles in communication. If you turn first to Ephesians chapter 4. Now, already in verse 29 of Ephesians 4, Paul has said, "Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear," which is excellent advice as far as communication. But in verse 31, it lists things that we are to put off, to get rid of. And what's the first thing to put off? The first one to put off is bitterness. And so you see there are scriptural foundations of these things we've been talking about. It's good to have studies and what people think, but I think that the real answer is right here in the Bible. And so you're going to see the things we've been talking about, but maybe presented in a different way. We are to put off bitterness. We are to put off wrath. And if you have another translation that has a good word for some of these, be sure and speak out. Wrath is just, it's a different form of anger. Yeah. There's a little bit of difference between wrath and anger.
What about melancholy?
Yeah, melancholy would, it's not in this list, but that'd probably be a sign. So it has both wrath and anger there, are two different things. Next, clamor. Does anybody have a different word for that in your translation? Brawling. Brawling, somebody had brawling, fighting, arguing. Slander. along with all malice. According to Paul here, these are things that we need to avoid in our communication, put off in our speech. Bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, slander, and malice. There are things we are to put on, and I think the example of God in John 3:16 should spill over to all of us, and the New Testament is full of admonition to love one another. But if God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, then that should motivate us to treat each other with love and to speak to each other in love. And then down in Ephesians 4:32, to be kind to one another. To be tender-hearted. What does it mean to be tender-hearted? It's gentle. It's
Soft and slow.
yeah. It's just the attitude that you have for somebody that's tender, that's kind, that's gentle and nice. Yeah, that doesn't. Yeah, they're not the same. To be a doormat and be tender-hearted aren't the same thing. To be forgiving. And then if you turn to Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, this list continues. The things that we are to focus on. We are to focus on things that are true. We are to focus on things that are honorable. We focus on things that are just.
No, it'd be right. It's just and right.
Yeah, in your translation it's right? Okay. Probably is lovely, pure is the next one. Okay, so lovely is pure in some of your translations.
I have both and lovely. Yeah, I have both. Lovely and pure.
And you just have to kind of look down your list. What's true, honorable, just, and lovely, whichever fits with what's in your translation. Especially on this next one. The New American Standard says of good repute. The ESV says commendable. It means well spoken of, is what the word literally means. The NIV, I think, says what's admirable. But the revised, the RSV says gracious. And I thought that was a good word because of good repute, you know, that's what it says, but doesn't really carry the idea of gracious. You know, if our speech is gracious, that, I think, communicates what it should be. We should focus on things that are excellent. And things that are worthy of praise. And so with that, we need to be focusing on the things that are positive of the other person. The things that aggravate us are really 15% of his or her personality. It just seems like 90% because that's what we focus on. You focus on it, that's 90%. If you back off and look at it, you realize it's really not that big a deal.
What was the last one?
The,
Okay.
This one there?
Yeah.
Anything worthy of praise, the last one. In Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 25, it says, anxiety in the heart of a man weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad. If we focus on the positive, that's what we do. I think 1 Corinthians 13:5 gives the other side of that coin, what happens when we say things that are negative. And so we need to learn to identify the positive, even in what might appear to be negative traits. We need to learn acceptance, Romans 5:8 says that while we were yet sinners, while we were still helpless at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 6, verse 8, God demonstrates his own love toward us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. If God accepts us that much while we were sinners, then we should learn to be accepting of others. We need to understand that God does not make junk. And we need to stay on the potter's wheel and allow the other person to stay on the potter's wheel, because when you criticize the pot, you're criticizing the potter. And both of those passages in Romans and Isaiah talk about God being the potter. And so if we look at somebody and says, oh, you're a lousy pot, what are we saying? God's a lousy potter. And so God does not make junk. Acceptance implies grace, and grace is giving the other person what they need and not what they deserve. All too often, don't people try to give somebody what they had it coming. It's fair. They asked for it. I wonder what happened if God treated us that way. You remember grace is a gift. It's giving something that you don't deserve, and in a marriage, it means that we give the other person what they need, not what they deserve.
I remember when I was younger, I used to dislike the word need, but as I got older, it's very powerful.
Which word's that?
Need.
Need? Yeah, it is. A lot of times we avoid that because we think it's a sign of weakness, but actually it's an opportunity to grow. We need to learn actions that confirm. Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 11, it says, it is by his deeds that a lad distinguishes himself if his conduct is pure and right. He says that somebody distinguishes himself by what they do, by their actions. It's a true statement that it's easier to act yourself into a better way of feeling than feel yourself into a better way of acting. And there are a couple of passages down there in Philippians and in Galatians. But I want to skip down to this part that, is it hypocrisy if I do something I don't feel like doing? Is that being hypocritical? I don't feel like doing it, so I'd be a hypocrite if I did it.
That means the baby doesn't get fed at 3.
Yeah, sleep through the baby feeding, that's for sure.
See, and I don't think it is, because I think even sometimes if we have to go through the motions for a little while, we'll come out of that and we've still kept doing the things that are right.
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't dropped the ball.
Hypocrisy is doing what you never intend to become. It's hypocritical to pretend something that you have no intention of ever becoming. But it's a change agent if you do what you intend to become. You may not be that yet, but that's what you want to be. And you act that way even though you may not want to right now. That's a change agent. That's something that enables us to change. And we'll stop there and leave those next two for next week because we don't want to run out of discussion time. Sometime we'll get caught back up where we're not doing two of the last ones this time, but I really don't want to take up any more of your time there. But everybody have the discussion sheet? The discussion questions? Okay. Thank you.
Dorothy, can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. We'll let everybody else get out of here first. Am I coming across?